Hey everybody, welcome to officehours.fm. I don't know why I said the dot. Office Hours FM, episode number 74, where I have got not just one, but a full team of folks joining me today from WP Shout, and I will introduce them to you in just a moment. First, just welcome. Glad you're tuning in today. I appreciate our sponsors for this episode, our DreamHost. They have their managed WordPress hosting service called DreamPress 2. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And our other host, which is the WordPress Development Workflow webinar series. I will tell you more about that later as well. So if you're listening live to this, you can either submit questions for these guys online on Twitter using the hashtag OfficeFM, or if you're watching over on Google+, just use the Q&A app, and we will see your question and get it to you there. So, without further ado, let's go down the line. And ladies first. Harper, tell the world a little bit about you, who you are, what you do.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Harper Phillips, and I work for WP Shout. I run our marketing and do a little bit of development and design here and there. So, yeah, that's kind of me.
All right. Fred, what's your story?
Well, I'm. You can hear me, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Okay, so I'm co-editor of WP Shout. I write about half the content, half the sort of weekly WordPress tutorial content, and I've been doing WordPress development since late 2012, depending on sort of how you do the math, and writing about WordPress since late 2013.
Sweet.
That leaves me.
David.
So I've been using WordPress since 2007, and with Fred, I write WP Shout. We also run a WordPress consultancy. We have at various times done far too many things, and yeah, that's about it.
Whoops, sorry, couldn't get my finger off the mute trigger fast enough. Okay, so WP Shout, you guys put out a ton of content for helping users understand how to use WordPress better. Would you say that your audience is primarily WordPress beginners?
Yeah, I think the thing we've kind of settled on is that we're WordPress tutorials for developers, which is that the idea is we aren't going to go show you how to go toggle on and off a menu. We're going to tell you how to make a menu show up in your theme, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a new, it's a tactic as far as where we're aware no one else is really taking in the market, and so it's kind of it makes some people unsure how to exactly make sense of what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, to tag on to that, I think somebody who would be really helped by a lot of our content is either somebody who's just starting out as a WordPress developer and is hitting sort of technical ceilings that are making it hard for them to satisfy clients, or somebody who may have been working as a designer for a long time, who has been needing to hire out developers when things get difficult, or having to rely on sort of hacky mountains of plugins to get stuff to work, and is just sort of really tired of not understanding how everything fits together. So those would be a couple people.
Pasting.
Yeah.
Or you copy and paste a thing. It doesn't really make sense. One of the things we really strive to do is not just give you the snippet that will make a thing behave in the way it does, but explain why it will behave in the way it does.
Yeah. Very cool. I know we've got listeners to this show who can relate to that, that are especially designers that are crossing over into maybe doing theme customizations, and then that can lead you down the rabbit hole. All of a sudden, you're coding up a storm. So very cool, the tutorials that you're doing. Harper, did you learn how to do your development via the blogs over there at WP Show?
I am in the process, actually. So I do, mostly the marketing kind of side of things, and really kind of applied and started working for the guys. I had kind of have more of a background in design and wanted to be able to translate that. So I'm probably the least technical of the three of us for sure, but I'm in the process of learning. So.
Well, there you go, guys. Just keep writing articles targeted at Harper, and you'll
Exactly.
you'll
That's
be.
how we do.
A good test market. So.
Well, I want to. I like what you guys are doing, and but instead of just focusing on the kind of content you're doing, I really want to kind of get down to the business nuts and bolts of things. You guys have multiple things going on. So you've got Press Up, which is your consultancy between you, David, and Fred, and you. So did y'all start that first, and then was WP Shout kind of born out of that, or what was that evolution?
Okay, I call giving this story. Right. So David and I are both from Fort Collins, Colorado, and we're both interested in meditation, and we reconnected in like maybe late 2011 around that shared interest. And in 2012, I was graduating from grad school for an unrelated thing. And on my last semester of grad school, so early 2012, I got interested in this business that would help people sort of stick with their meditation practice. And I just sort of wrote David because I knew he had some free time. And it turned out he was a really good developer. I mean, I had no idea. I just was like, oh, somebody else who likes meditation who I know has some free time. And it turned out he was a really good PHP developer already. And so we just spent like the next maybe year and a half just coding really hard on this web app that exists. It's called Medivate, medivate.com. And after about a year, the thing we didn't launch Medivate with was a revenue model. So we spun off PressUp because we were like, okay, well, we've been doing PHP development just like full time for like a year, making no money. And we were getting to a point with our personal savings where money had to happen. So we spun off a web consultancy and like started really like at a really low rate and started like cold emailing people, got our first couple clients that way, and then pretty quickly got into WordPress development specifically. Although we still do all kinds of development, most of our clients are WordPress, end up using WordPress, and worked on PressUp since maybe very, very late 2012. I don't know. I get my dates mixed up. And then in late 2013, the founder of WP Shout, who had been running it since 2009, was transitioning out of it, and that's how we sort of came on at WP Shout. Maybe this was actually a longer answer than I intended to give, but we started out doing like a web app for crazy side reasons. Then got into development from that. Then got into sort of WordPress tutorial writing, pretty much as a function of the original founder of WP Shout moving out of the property and us sort of taking over as owners there.
Well, that's news alert. I did not realize WP Shout pre-existed or predated.
Yeah, it was founded by this guy Alex Denning. He was 16 when we founded it in 2009. He's this really good marketing mind. And actually, he just launched a project called Blog Better. It's spelled like blog better if you didn't know that better has two R's. That doesn't have the second, two E's, excuse me. If you didn't know it has the second E, so BLOGBETTR, I think .com. He just launched it like this week. And he launched WP Shout in 2009 and, posted pretty regularly. So we've got content going all the way back to 2009. And then was going to like go to college because he was like 18 or whatever. And that's when we took over.
And was there already a fairly established readership base at that time? Or what was the value in taking over WP Shout versus starting your own thing?
There was an established readership. He'd built a large mailing list, and he was really well networked in with the other people sort of writing and thinking about WordPress because he'd been in it very early, and he's very sort of outgoing and very good at building connections. So relative to just starting a WordPress tutorial thing, we were about 5 years ahead of where we would have been if we would have done that ourselves.
Man, hearing about these people that are 16 and doing this sort of stuff, I just feel so way behind the curve. Like I can never catch up.
I know.
I can't make my first $1 million by 20 because I passed that decade by a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, the hope is always that we'll live super long. Like maybe we'll live to 120 and it'll average out. And they'll just like 80 or 90, but anyway.
It's true. We could be pioneers in nursing homes, like hitting our century mark and rolling out cool new plugins.
Yeah, that's when we make our first million. Yeah.
That's newsworthy right there. Okay, so WP Shout, and then you also have the blog dedicated to WordPress business tips. Was that also part of the WP Shout package, or a separate entity?
David?
Yeah, that actually gets to what I mentioned earlier about we have a tendency to start too many things. So WP Business Tips was an idea where I was just like, hey, you know what? Business and WordPress, they two great taste better together. And it never we've been pushing on that for about 2 years or so, I think, and it's never taken off in the way we would have liked. And so actually we're in the process of rolling that back into PressUp because it's kind of like half of the intention of starting it in the first place was to use that as a lead generator for clients we want to work with, because people who are looking for help using WordPress in their business online are to some extent ideal clients for the kind of work we do. So it makes more sense having now tried it and seen where it didn't go to roll it back in and have an integrated flow by which someone is like, oh, I'm interested in this article, I want to hire you, rather than the second order thing, which is what WP's Business Tips has always kind of had this struggle of. There's this, oh, I'm involved with WP Business Tips, oh, I should hire you, and we never really got a revenue model that was solid behind it, because it is that second order thing, and we vaguely thought we could make it a first order thing, but it was like, it's just a lot of effort to keep all these things running. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you bring up an interesting point. If you're wanting to use it as a lead gen tool for PressUp, but doing it under a name that people weren't necessarily associating with the PressUp brand or your names.
Yeah, I mean, part of the idea there was that the way we approach our work at PressUp is that we really sort of are strategic partners in whatever it is that somebody's doing. So, if somebody says, hey, like, I think I need this site and I want it to be multi-site, we don't just go off and give them a multi-site install and be like, wow, that's a terrible idea, like, too bad. Like, we'll try to take, feature requests and say, okay, that's great that you want these features, but like, what actually are you trying to do, and what's the model there, and like, how do you make money, or do you care? So, and it's always the hardest thing is always to get paid for the consulting value that you deliver up front. You maybe you save somebody from spending 20,000 just wasted dollars on a mobile app when what they really need is a WordPress site because they didn't know that that responsive design is a thing or something like that. So you just save them $20,000, and they're like, "That's great. This was really fun to talk. We'll have a follow-up call next week." And then you eventually make your money sort of doing hourly, just like development work. So we were like, well, we want to get paid for the consulting side of it, and that's sort of part of why spinning off Business Tips, WP Business Tips, that was part of the genesis of that idea, is like, let's make this a place where people who are thinking about business and working in WordPress can go to sort of learn basic kind of online strategy stuff, and we can consult to them. But as David sort of said it, I don't know. We pushed on it for a while, and we were just kind of doing too many things, and it was the one that was easiest to sort of transition back into another property because it kind of wasn't sustainable how many things we were doing at once.
Sure. Well, you throw things out there and see if they stick. I know what that's like.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Devender. He's talking about. We've talked a little bit about what your original plans were for the WP Business Tips site, but what is your monetization model for WP Shout?
Sure. Right now it's kind of twofold. One is that we have partners on our site who are currently InMotion, SiteGround, and ServeMask, which is a plugin maker, and they're giving us $6,000 a year, and we write articles about them. Kind of this native advertising thing that you either love or hate, and we think that it's really good content. That we published a couple weeks ago an interview with Fristo from SiteGround about how their caching works, and it's interesting from a technical perspective, and it also happens to show a light on why SiteGround is so performant for the average WordPress shared hosting comparison. And then the secondary thing is we've published Up and Running. We interviewed you for, Carrie, which is it's a book but also a course about kind of for exactly those people we mentioned at the top that Shout is for. It's for people who are interested in WordPress development, but mostly are designers or don't really get all the stuff or that kind of thing. It's to help them start to understand all the stuff that's going on inside of a WordPress installation, really start to get comfortable just writing a plugin, for example, or making your first child theme or whatever it is. So that grew out of Shout itself, and ideally is a secondary stream of income we can make on Shout. Sorry.
So this is a personal question, and you don't have to answer. But does this site pay for itself in terms of the hours that you guys are putting in? And I know the Up and Running book hasn't been on the market for very long, so it may be kind of early to judge. But well, yeah, I won't even extend the question. Want to answer?
Okay, it might be fun for all of us to answer, not at once, but my answer is definitely yes, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the actual amount of just revenue we brought in this year, specifically on Shout, this was the first year that we had this sort of partnership model that David talked about, and the amount of money that we've brought in for that would already pay for our work on Shout, I think. As well as the sales of Up and Running, which have, they haven't they haven't been enough for me to get that boat out of layaway.
We aren't retiring.
Yeah, we're not retiring, but have been healthy. So I think we're at the point where just if you look at it from a cash flow standpoint, it's worth what we're doing. But it's also true that, for example, our biggest, highest quality client that we've ever attracted came as a function of us working on WShout, and partly because Alex is so good at networking, he was on some lists of top WordPress developers that a couple of hosting companies kept up. That's how this guy sort of originally found us, and it's led to a huge amount of business for us just from that person alone. So there are that in particular was this pretty low probability thing that just kind of really blew up financially for us and has made Shout worth it. And it's also true that there's a lot of kind of intangible value in having a voice in the WordPress community and being able to meet people like you, and being able to go to a WordCamp and be like, hey, what do you do in WordPress? And we're like, well, we run a consultancy, and we write stuff at WP Shout, and people go, oh my God, I love you guys, and that's a really fun experience. I don't know when we get paid for that. But,
well, you're internet famous. That's very satisfying.
Yeah, that's right. It's awesome. There's nothing better than that. I can't think of anything. So
maybe
that's my answer.
Being internet famous from a yacht, but
Yeah, working on that. What do you guys think, David and Harper? I mean, just financially, is it worth it? I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of the question is just what are you comparing it to? Because if you compare it to the hourly rate we can charge clients, I think you'd find probably that the number is comically low. But then again, we're not doing it. It's not client work. There is no client but us and the thousands of people who read the site. So it's not. It's a whole different caliber of work and a different feeling to the work. So if you're talking pure dollars and cents, is that the most efficient way we could be spending our time? I don't think the answer is yes. But as Fred said, there are a lot of intangible, very nice things that come out of it too.
Yeah, the intangibles are hard to measure, but that would definitely be included in the I don't know if I said worth it, but paying for itself or justifying its existence, I guess. And Harper, did you want to chime in on that?
I mean, Fred and David kind of covered most of it. I sort of think of it as, a lot of basically the bulk of the ad revenue that we've been able to generate kind of pays for me. So like that's been, a good thing. And I do a lot of the maintenance and the promotion of that site. So it doesn't seem to be, it adds a lot of notoriety, I think, to the work or notoriety and legitimacy to the work we do, and allows us to reach out to people that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. So yeah, it's not quite always, a direct way of looking at cash flow, but I think it seems to be really worth it.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you guys have said, and can kind of testify to that myself, that writing content over a period of years is not necessarily generating dollars, but it does help tremendously with your credibility with clients and being internet famous at WordPress.
Wait. It does make sense.
Oh, I see.
To not be punny, I was actually going to throw in that the other thing is, like, putting together these tutorials exposes, like, it makes it for me at least, it's almost always like I'm required to get clarity on things that are otherwise kind of fuzzy about, like, why is this function have this argument or whatever like that. Things that I could probably work in WordPress for 5 years and never learn. Sometimes you find something in the process of doing that like, oh, wow, like, head exploding kind of thing that just you don't get if you're just always, implementing sites for people over and over.
Well, going back to the question of sponsored posts, we've got some questions on Twitter. How are you, or how transparent are those relationships to your readers, or how are you disclosing that?
Well, I mean, we have, see if this answers the question. I mean, we have a list of our partners just right in the sidebar on the site. And I think in our sidebar it says, are you interested in becoming a friend of WP Shout? Like, here's our sponsorships page. And that lists sort of in full detail the terms of our partnerships. The one thing I'll say is that, we really only partner with organizations that we're genuinely enthusiastic about. I mean, we deliver a great product. Ideally, we use the product ourselves. And so, I mean, the absolute thing we wanted away from when we decided to sort of have like a partnership model is just kind of like random fly-by-night advertising, which we actually did for a little while in 2014. And the two problems with it are, it's just not very effective for anybody because people are completely blind to banner ads.
Like, are you talking about like Google Ads, that sort of randomness?
We thought about AdSense, but that is like, we've never been that far down the random thing because we've never been as far as AdSense. And the reason is because just our site traffic alone wouldn't be enough to make us interesting amounts of money doing AdSense ads. And then the other problem is it just, like, the ads we did do before we had sort of these, like, we actually really like you and we love your service and we're going to write 4 articles across the year, interesting articles about what you guys are up to, like the SiteGround article we wrote a couple weeks ago. Like, before we had the model, we just had sort of banner ads that we sort of sold to folks individually, and it wasn't working for them, and we weren't able to, ask an amount of money that was worth the effort, So the only way that we're kind of willing to do this is close year-long relationships with companies that we genuinely love, because then we can actually, sort of tell your story in a way that, even though our readership isn't millions of people, actually moves the needle for you. Yeah.
All right, I gotcha. So, man, I feel I didn't come into this conversation thinking let's talk about money, but we're all business owners here. But so you guys have experienced enough growth to need to hire Harper. What was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back? Like, oh my gosh, we need help. Anybody?
I would be tempted to let you take that, Fred.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, David and I talked about this, like a very chronic thing in David's and my work together is actually me taking on too much stuff, and I have a pretty chaotic working style, and so stuff like I'll commit to it and I will do it, but you know it might get done like a week or two later than either of us would have liked, and in the meantime David's going like, did this get done? And I'm like, just give me a couple days, you know. And when we were running Press Up, Metivate, Shout, and Business Tips in 2014, and trying to sort of get regular content out the door on like 3 of those properties, and doing client work, and you know, I mean, there's always something, you know, like, oh, do you have workers' comp? You know, it's like, and then you have to figure out what that means in Colorado, and you know, I don't live in Colorado, so I mean, so you know, we were running a business and then running 4 web properties and putting out basically weekly content on 3 of them, and trying to make a living. And I was basically taking on most of that, you know, all the daily stuff, and because David had sort of like a large client project that was just sort of ongoing through most of last year, and that
wonder you need to meditate.
Yeah, well, it wasn't helping. It doesn't work. So that was, you know, at that point, because we had this large client that I told you about, we had the finances to be able to say, okay, well, you know, we can try this out for a year and, you know, and still float even if it completely doesn't work. And, you know, it just felt unsustainable. Like I was taking on things that I just couldn't make happen.
And Harper, I've been told in advance by both Fred and David that you're free to say whatever you want, carte blanche permission on this show with 0 repercussions. But coming in, like we've talked about this before on the show, and I've even thought about, okay, what would it be like to have some help and to offload some of the work? But I have no system for it. Like if you were to say, all right, Carrie, I'm here. I'm ready to do whatever you've got. I wouldn't know how to effectively utilize you just because I don't have the systems in place to do that. Was it a little bit of a make things up as you go, or how did you fall into that role?
Absolutely. I think when I first started, and I've been working with the guys for about a year, it was a fair amount of copywriting, and luckily a lot of the work that we do on Shout is already fairly systemized. We have like daily posting that I'm pretty much kind of managing, and so coming into that, and that was actually a really great introduction because a lot of our daily posting is just stuff around the WordPress world. So a lot of what I did was just be able to kind of read articles and figure out that space and learn about the people that I was going to be marketing to, like while actually doing work, which was really great. Yeah, and then I think, you know, we've had some processes of just as a remote team that really needed to be organized. So we use Trello is one of our main tools, and then HipChat have been both, you know, have worked really well, and have streamlined that process a lot. And then I think I naturally just am pretty organized and have an aptitude for creating systems and like to have a lot of my work just streamlined with that. So that's definitely been something that's been helpful. But yeah, so I think, you know, hopefully finding somebody who's able to just kind of come in and make up their job as they go along and see what can be done.
Yeah, not necessarily need a lot of excessive direction.
Yeah.
Take the ball and run.
And as Fred mentioned, our style is kind of like, we'll try things, we'll kind of like choose that, oh yeah, that'll be cool, or that kind of thing. So it really is necessary that Harper is able to direct herself, because we are not the kind of people who have a binder full of standard operating procedures that we can hand someone. And Harper received that on her first day and is now executing them. Like, it's been the complete opposite process-wise, because, you know, we just, that's not our style, and that is really the obstacle that we you know, we're struggling with in advance of like trying to find someone, is like, how do we bring someone in and make sure that they're able to, you know, stay interested and be helpful and all that stuff, and it requires a fair amount of self-direction, and self-management to work in a completely distributed and totally disorganized system like we have.
So how
Yeah,
did y'all, or how did you find Harper, or Harper? How did you find these guys?
I
Craigslist,
think
right?
actually wasn't. I think it was Craigslist, which is
Yeah, we
funny.
knew we
because
wanted.
I've been working for a job for a while and like tried a bunch of different things, but
Yeah,
Craigslist.
we knew we wanted somebody in Colorado, just to simplify basically our payroll, and also so that Harper and David would have some chance of sort of being in the same place at the time. And so we just put out Craigslist. I think it was the Boulder Craigslist probably that Harper
Yeah.
that we found you. And we had some interviews, and yeah, it was a really pretty simple hiring process actually.
Okay, that is a first. I've had a lot of listeners who are either they're designers or they're developers, and they're looking to kind of partner up with one or the other, or maybe someone looking for an admin assistant, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And of all the suggestions my guests have given, no one has ever said post an ad on Craigslist.
It worked.
But yeah, you're a testimony. That's awesome. Yeah, you could have been like scary axe murderer, but
Yeah.
you just turned up and are adorable. So no fear there of the axe murder. So I want to shift gears a little bit on the second half of the show and talk about your project up and running. But before we do that, I would like to do the promise that I told you earlier, and that is to tell you more about our sponsors. So DreamPress 2 is a managed WordPress hosting service, and I had somebody just yesterday ask me what is the difference between shared hosting and managed WordPress hosting. Does it just mean that WordPress already comes installed? Well, yes, that's part of it, but typically that's the very least of it. Typically with a managed WordPress host, what you're getting is servers that are optimized specifically for WordPress. So you're not sharing a server with people that are running who knows what kind of apps. These are all WordPress sites. There's typically some caching in place, which is the case with DreamPress 2, uptime monitoring, and just some really nice bells and whistles in terms of performance. So anyways, if you want to check them off, it's actually 40% off of DreamPress 2 right now. You can check them out at dreamhost.com/officehoursfm. And then our second sponsor, now this is just going to, for the way of full disclosure, this is my own product. So I charged myself out the wazoo for the sponsorship spot. But it's a webinar series called WordPress Development Workflow. It's a 3-part series led by myself and Mika Epstein, who unrelatedly works for DreamHost, and we just walked through a WordPress development structure. So from learning how to develop sites in a local environment to using version control to working with the database and deploying your site live. And yeah, so lots of fun. You can check that out over at wpdevelopmentworkflow.com. And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. If you are just tuning in halfway through the show, I've got the crew from WP Shout on, Fred, David, and Harper. If you want to ask questions, you can do that on Google Hangouts or on Twitter with the hashtag OfficeFM. Whew. Need an oxygen tank for that. Okay, so you guys have let's just call it a
course.
a labor of love, I'm assuming, or maybe it was a labor of hate by the time you finally rolled out up and running. But you call it a multimedia
course.
Yes. So for folks that aren't familiar with that, can just kind of give the outline of what it is, what it entails.
Okay, I'll start, and David, you chime in, and Harper. Basically, it's the goal of Up and Running is to help people understand the fundamentals of WordPress development. So that's on an intuitive level, like I understand how everything fits together, and then it's also on a sort of details level, like, oh, I understand how to write an action hook, for example. The reason we don't call it a book is because it is actually a multimedia package. It's an ebook, a bunch of sort of infographics that sort of map out, for example, like what's on the front end and what's on the back end in a WordPress environment. And then something like 60 tutorial videos that David and I recorded. I walked through sort of the basics of HTML, CSS, PHP, and JavaScript, and David has a screencast series on creating a WordPress child theme, creating a WordPress theme from scratch, and creating an actually pretty cool plugin that makes remote API calls and publishes to a widget using, and I think it has a shortcode thingy in there as well, right, David? So it really is like book, visuals, and a lot of video, kind of all wrapped into one, which is why it would be so much easier to call it a book, but that would kind of sell it short.
When you started the project, did you have all of that in mind, or was it meant to be an ebook and then it just sort of exploded?
Yeah, the initial impulse for it was like, we're creating all this great content on WP Shout every week. We should like do something with that. And so kind of what happened is if anyone's familiar with Nathan, I'm forgetting his last name now.
Barry.
Anyway. Who?
Nathan Barry, right?
Yeah, Nathan Barry. He's all about self-publishing this sort of thing, that like a multimedia e-book that's not really just an e-book, and so we basically ended up deciding that we wanted to go that way, and so we fleshed it out. I think Fred might have forgotten to mention the interviews we did with people like Carrie and Mika and Helen Husandi and Tom McFarlane, Pippin Williamson, all of these people we got to interview, and so that's also a thing you can get in the packages. And so basically what happened was what was initially like, oh, we will just roll up some tutorials into this nice book thing, became like let's rewrite all the tutorials to make them flow really well in this book, and let's throw in all these screencasts and all this other stuff to really like essentially deliver fully like to take someone all the way, rather than a book which someone might buy and spend 5 minutes flipping through and be like, oh, I'll read that someday. The idea is like by being in all these different formats and stuff, someone can really come in, and whether they want to go one direction or the other, there's something there for them, and then they can go back to the other things as they make sense.
Yeah, David's right. I didn't mention the interviews, but just what those were is, first we interviewed, it was a total of you and 12 other people, so 13 people, just about sort of their progress through WordPress development, and like what specifically helped them become like a top WordPress developer. And then with each person we looked at code, sort of the idea being, typically it was maybe a plugin that somebody wrote. I think with you we may have actually looked through a Genesis child theme that you were working on. I can't remember, but no, I think it was actually a plugin that you wrote that had to do with Genesis.
Plugin, yeah.
My memory tends to be bad, so excuse me. But the idea was like, one of the ways that I learned WordPress development is just basically looking over David's shoulder for like 2 years, and so we wanted to give that experience to people as well, like the opportunity to just really look into the code of people who reason about WordPress development, like top in the world. And so, as David said, I mean, it's just really trying to give people a lot of ways in, and sort of like the kind of combined learning experience that, for example, I was able to benefit from just by benefit of having a better developer around to look at his code, and maybe he would pair with me on a problem I was having, and then he would send me to a tutorial that he knew could solve my problem or something. And we really wanted to give people that experience, as opposed to, like, as David said, a book that kind of quickly becomes dry and hard to understand, and then you're kind of done.
Is there a cohesive, I guess, a thread that runs through all that? Like, when you start this book, here you are, and when you end this book, you should be able to do X, Y, Z, or is it more just all the insights from seeing these different the ways that people logic through their code, and more of just, I guess, learning the experience? That's not the right word, but I don't know if that question made sense.
I think it does, and I think the question is it like, are you going, A to B to C to D to E, right? Or is it like you're trying to give? And my experience is that learning WordPress is a little bit more like learning a language, like Portuguese or something, than it is like learning, addition, and that implies subtraction, and that implies multiplication, and that implies division, So it really is more like trying to give people the basics of the WordPress language with major pieces of intuition that your entire understanding should rest on. So an example is this idea we have that WordPress is a factory. It's just like the best metaphor we know of to explain what WordPress is and like how it does what it does. So like the database is the warehouse where the raw materials sit. The raw materials are the posts, but they're raw materials until the factory, which is the WordPress processing itself, processes it into the final product. And okay, well, what's a theme? Well, the theme is like the assembly lines that processing happens on, and the template hierarchy determines which line in that assembly line you're going to go down. So if you go down the page.php line, you come out looking one way, and if you go down the single.php line or the index, so like we try really hard not to go like, yeah, this is filter syntax. Great, we're done. But we try to give like intuition. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well, what are we hooking in? Well, we're hooking in outside contractors. Plugins, they live in a hotel near the factory. They don't live in the factory because we don't want them in there all the time. You know what I mean? So,
That's awesome.
So, yeah, we're really trying to give people like an intuitive understanding of this sort of this broad language. Yeah, David or Parker, anything you'd like to?
Yeah, I mean the one thing I was gonna throw in there is like, yeah, as Fred was saying, we didn't go in the direction of like you will create a theme based on underscores by the end of this tutorial. Although there is a process that, creating a theme without using any starter theme does go on, and you can watch me do it, or you can read the book and like sort of take some of the examples to go make a plugin, for example. But the goal is much more like the coherent, organic understanding that we've come to after playing with WordPress for 5 years or more, rather than like a specific like we want to utilitarianly walk you through the steps to create this thing, and at the end you get through and you're like, I think I could maybe do that again if I had the book as reference material. Like, it's much more, we were going for an organic, like, I mean, the way I've learned all about programming, and the way I think probably is the only way you actually learn it, as Fred said, is like as a language where you just organically sort of have to have a conversation and like be out of your depth because someone's too technical, or be out of your depth because this thing just doesn't work and it seems like it should, and like you're just talking to this person over and over and their dialect's too different or whatever it is. It's really an organic, holistic process, which is why there are so many different formats that we played with, and they don't form like you will get in this to this X on the map, because the X on the map is something that you might not want to ever do again after you finish a step-by-step guide to getting to the X.
Are you getting paid for every mention of organic?
Yes.
By Organic Themes, yes. OrganicThemes.com. Your source for themes that don't have hormones.
No, what you're saying makes sense. Sort of that immersive experience when you're just sort of around something, and then eventually it clicks. Yeah. But no, I love the warehouse analogy. That's very creative.
Yeah, because the issue is, right, someone's got to come in and like replace that factory every once in a while, which is what, like, hey, WordPress 4.3 is out. And so if you put your contractors inside the factory, they won't disappear randomly.
An excellent point. They get white screened of death, or yeah, I don't know. Sorry, this is what it looks like when I'm trying to formulate a coherent question. Where do you leave people in the book? Is it like, to continue, go here, or is it wait till our follow-up up and running part 2 comes out, ... How are
very
you
up.
Tying that
if
back?
we did write a sequel, it would be very up and sprinting.
There's a cliffhanger. Like
Yeah.
literally, we left Fred hanging out on a cliff at the end.
Yeah. So, that's a good question. I mean, basically what we try to do is say like the fundamentals of theme and plugin development, you should, these are them. You know, if somebody went through the material in Up and Running and actually comprehended it, they would understand the fundamentals of theme and plugin development. And there would be probably some things they didn't understand to do, like we don't cover. I mean, there's a lot of things we don't cover. We tried actually to stay out of things that are kind of needlessly elaborate, and just go like, this is the meat and potatoes of WordPress development. You know what I mean? So, and basically, when there's more to say on a topic, like we'll just sort of kick it out to, for example, the codex, or maybe even a really good tutorial we found that goes deep into it. But we do have, I think, a page right at the end of the actual book itself that says like these are topics we didn't do much with, and they are important as you get more advanced in WordPress development, and these are the places that we absolutely recommend you learn about them. And a lot of those are articles that are on WP Shout, and then some of them are just articles at other places online. And so I think we do really try to make clear, what we don't cover and what the intent of the material is, which is not to sort of cover everything like output buffering or, whatever. But to really go like, okay, well, if you're a WordPress developer working on not unusually complex projects, 90% of the time you're going to be doing, one of this set of things, and and then maybe, and then we try to sort of indicate what the remaining 10% is, as sort of like the next steps are this thing. I think that's accurate. David or Harper, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you got it.
Oh, whoops! I was muted again. Sorry. No, I mean there's so much in the WordPress educational space that it's I think it's almost overwhelming because there's you can go piecemeal together from a million tutorials, or you could go take a course, something on Treehouse or Lynda, but would be more that utilitarian, step 1, 2, 3 sort of sequence. But it sounds like you guys are differentiating in that you're more less about a product trying to create an end goal for a user versus just helping them understand the broader concepts and so forth. So
yeah, I think the big goal of someone who buys the course and really dives into it is that what you would arrive at is the same place one would get by reading tutorials for a year, or watching a Lynda course and then kind of following what goes on Tuts Plus or whatever about WordPress tutorials. Because there's this organic process that you can go through, and the idea is we wanted to really distill down the essence of that into as compact a package as we can, such that you can really get the entire organic experience of learning the various facets of WordPress from different angles and in different ways in a concentrated little Boolean cube of like exactly the knowledge that one really needs to go from like, I kind of was able to copy and paste this thing into work, but I don't have any idea why, into like, oh yeah, I'm pretty confident about why this is working and what these 4 changes that I might want to make in the future would look like when I made them, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and something I want to type. Please go ahead.
In addition to never hearing about Hired on Craigslist on the show, we've never had a bouillon cube used either. So I'm just trying
organic bouillon.
Yeah. Was this range-free?
Yes, grass-fed. Only the best. Grass-fed, no hormones. Shop at Whole Foods. They're our major sponsor, but it's a secret.
Oh.
So what I was going to say.
Go ahead.
Just quickly, is just to rephrase what David kind of said, like a word that keeps coming up for me is sort of the intuition behind WordPress coding practices. Because I learned a lot by diving in the middle, and you just hit like the codex page for like, you know, the settings API or something like that. And it's like you don't understand something as basic as like, maybe even as basic as like, this is the server doing a bunch of stuff, and then it's going to send it to my browser, which is going to interpret it. And the server, for example, the server-side client-side distinction, or again, like what WordPress is. It's a factory that, you know, creates processed web pages for a browser to consume. Or what's another example? Like this, the different meanings of post and page in WordPress. There are so many of those meanings. You know, a page is a post of type page. You know, a post is a post of any type, but it could also be a post of type post. You understand? So it's like really trying to get intuition under people's feet so that their learning process is a lot quicker and more efficient than perhaps was. Is probably just a sort of a way to kind of rephrase what David just said.
Up and running, the essence of organic intuition.
Yeah.
It makes it sound like a
presented by Whole Foods.
If you buy now, you get a complimentary free-range chicken bouillon cube. Okay, so let's shift gears entirely. Get back to the consulting aspect of things. We've got a couple of questions. One is, what's your take on value pricing for value? Do you do that? Are you fixed rate or fixed fee? How do you approach pricing? I'll let anyone who wants. Oh, Harper wants to take that question.
Oh, I don't think.
Were you pointing? I don't know.
I think I was trying to point to David.
To me.
Oh,
Yeah.
But Fred and I have talked a lot about various ways of charging. And for us, it always comes down to, because of all the things we do, and because we're not wanting to, you know, take on the full risk of the scope creeps in this direction, we feel obligated to the client to accept that scope creep, because that sort of thing. We always end up coming back to hourly. We've talked about doing daily, but it's like, oh, well, what if half a day is spent writing a shout post? Then you know, how do we account for that? And like, we always come up with objections to keep us on hourly, whether or not they're correct or the best possible argument for it. So we typically are hourly. I do think there is a lot of value to be found in value-based framing in a discussion with a client, absolutely, regardless of whether or not you end up trying to say, oh, I'm going to charge my clients 30% of the value that they feel like they will get at the end of the project or not. Just keeping that in mind and reframing the conversation about not how you are going to go download 2 plugins and install it for them, but bring it back to what this means for their business when it's done. Really, like, that just like changes the tenor of a lot of these conversations, because a lot of people are, especially in the WordPress space, are looking to hire someone who can like dink all the buttons that they don't know how to click. And when they're thinking about you in those terms, they're gonna like want you to be $15 an hour and just go click the buttons real quick because you know where they are and I don't, and so you should do it really quick and it shouldn't cost me very much. But when you're able to shift that discussion into terms of why are we clicking all these buttons and what are we going to realize as a business in the future because we clicked all those buttons, I think that's a useful frame regardless of how you end up charging at the far end.
So you're having value conversations.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. But like David said, it's a couple of things are true. One is that we've managed to get ourselves to a base hourly rate that is pretty good. And so it takes some of the, like, we are delivering a lot of value for people essentially for free, like I talked about, you know, and, you know, it kind of stung and still stings. And that was part of the idea about creating WP Business Tips, so that the consulting side of that could be like productized and people buy it as a package and stuff. But at the end of the day, like, if you're getting to an hourly rate that you're happy with, it does sort of take some of the sting out of that. And the only thing that I would say about value-based pricing, first of all, is that I I think we're trying to give you reasons why we haven't done it that maybe relate to things like our own cowardice and stuff like that. It's not reasons. It's not reasons why it's not a good idea. But I would say, okay, one of my most recent clients was like a nonprofit with almost no money to spend, and I wanted to help them. And like a value-based conversation would have been hard to have with them. And then another one is like this. It's this large sort of organization, but that it's not exactly a nonprofit, but it kind of runs like one. And what am I? Okay, the point I'm trying to make is like to say I'm going to deliver this much value for you guys, and that's what it is. Gets way deep into the business of the client in a way that I want to get into it as a discussion. You guys can be so helped by this, this site we're going to build you because it's going to be so huge for your lead generation, But I don't want to make promises because a lot of that stuff is out of my hands. You know what I mean? I can build them the best, way to grow a mailing list, but then they don't write content, And it's like unless I'm coming on as a fully realized consultant, I would like to have the value conversation with them, and but not sort of feel guilty if the $1,000 this could have made them if they did everything right doesn't materialize. You know what I mean? So somebody like you should have Brennan Dunn on here right now to just like shout at us or something. But that's probably where I'm at in terms of like why I don't do that with clients.
I wish I had like a little control board and just a cutout of Brennan's head where he could just pop in from the side of the screen and say, because that's exactly what his voice does not sound like. Okay, well that was awkward. No, thank you for expounding on that. I think it is a difficult. It's just a very different way of looking at things, and you're right. You do have to really kind of get in somebody's business to even determine what that value outcome could be. Excuse me. Yeah, it's still a journey for me as well.
Yeah. If I can just expand on that real quick, I wanted to say that like one thing that's true is that the easiest advice in the world with respect to like making more money is to charge more, and it's also the hardest advice to follow because you're like, oh, but like it's a psychology problem more than it's a practical one because everyone knows that you make more money when you charge more. But it's a internal battle, which is what Fred mentioned about like part of this is just like the way we work and the way we think about it and the way my head is wired, and it's not that this is not a superior strategy. It's that I'm not ready to fully implement that strategy because of these obstacles that I have and the way I think about it.
Yeah, I think just this morning was chatting with Kirk Bowman, who is the Art of Value on Twitter, and he said before you can I'm going to butcher his quote, but it was essentially you have to believe that you can create value before you can actually charge people based on that value. If you can say, okay, I'm going to go do some value-based pricing an hour, but if you don't really believe you can deliver on that, then it's exactly what you just said. It's I'm not saying you don't believe you can deliver value, but I think it comes back to confidence, and that's something that all of us have a little bit of imposter syndrome or
One thing I'll add is that I think for corporate clients, I would be a lot more comfortable with value-based pricing because the numbers would be there, and there would be a person whose job it was to make the numbers good, So I think that would be a much easier proposition. It just happens that a lot of my clients are maybe personal relationships I have that are either like very startup-y, they're very early stage, or they're sort of in the nonprofit space or something like that. And it's just a harder thing to even fathom. But if I was going to build like a WordPress site for Colgate toothpaste, I'd be like, okay, well this is worth like $70 million to you guys, and I want like 10% of that.
And on the Colgate toothpaste note, we
are buzz marketing so many products on your podcast, Carrie.
I know, right? I'm gonna submit sponsorship invoices to all of them. Just kidding. So yeah, we've been chatting chatting for an hour, so I want to respect your guys' time because I'm sure you have things to do, like write more content for your mini sites. And my listeners, I'm sure, want to finish your lunch or whatever. If you're tuning in live, I always appreciate my live listeners and the great questions that you send in, so thank you for that. If you want to catch the replay of the show, or any previous episode of Office Hours, you can do that over at officehours.fm. Also, there's a YouTube channel. If you don't feel like going to Office Hours FM, you can just look for them on YouTube. Okay, well, guys and ladies, thank you so much for coming on today and kind of and letting me ask some rather personal questions. Just enjoyed chatting with y'all. Any parting words or things that you want to, any more products you want to pimp before we go?
Kellogg's Frosted Mini Wheats.
The Frosted Crunch is good for lunch. Also good for lunch. A lot of people think it's just a breakfast food.
Excellent. All right. In that case, so if people want to follow up with you, they can. Should they go to at WP Shout on Twitter or WPShout.com?
Yes, please.
Yeah. And up and running WP.com is the multimedia package we were talking about.
Yep.
I'm going to run out and buy Up and Sprinting WP.com right now.
Write it real fast.
Uh-oh.
Well, thanks, guys, and to everyone out there listening, we'll see you next Thursday. Have a fantastic weekend.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.